guys, it's Kat, and we're here for the True Tea Call-In Show. This is the show where I ask my audience for their brew of true tea about this month's topic. This month's topic is the term queer, and I wanted to open up the calls to people who feel various different ways about the term queer, because for me personally, queer is a term that I once identified with but no longer do. Now, if you want to know my full feelings about this, check out my podcast, but to really quickly go over them, when I was younger, I identified as genderqueer, and for me, that was very seated in a political uprooting of gender as a concept, right? I lived to defy gender, I lived to contradict gender, and that was a very large part of not only my personality, but the way that I frankly factored into society. As I recognized myself as a binary trans woman and fell pretty deeply into that, I essentially assimilated into one specific gendered idea, where now people look at me and tend to assume correctly of both my gender and my sexuality, which has left me in a position where the things that I once felt were very queer about me no longer quite feel very queer. In fact, I struggle claiming the term because of what I feel would be stolen valor with claiming the term queer as a person who isn't often in positions where people digest me in that way. So I wanted to talk to you guys about this term because I know that there's a lot of people who reject the term queer because queer is a term that I guess a lot of people don't want to identify with because of the whole I'm not like the other LGBTQIA plus folks kind of shit. But that's not where I'm coming from, and I know that's not where a lot of other people are coming from. And so I wanted to open up the conversation to a wide range of people who feel differently about this because it's just an interesting conversation. You guys know that one of the things I like to do is just open up conversations so that we can learn about each other. Interestingly enough, I got a lot of comments from people that said that the last podcast episode helped them see some stuff about themselves. It kind of reiterated or reinforced or sometimes contradicted some ideas they had about themselves. And of course, I didn't expect that to happen. In fact, I expected y'all to flame me, if I'm being completely honest. But we had some really great conversations in the comment section, and I'm really excited to have the calls today to flesh those comments out a bit more. So on that note, let's get into some calls. Who am I speaking to, and what is your true tea?
My name is Mary, and my true tea is that while I do identify as queer at this moment, I find it quite an interesting term that is necessary because I'm deathly afraid of committing to an identity and then being known as that and then saying, actually, it's not this. Like, I figured out another thing. And then it's, why were you lying? Why would you commit to something when it's not that? Because, at least for me, it's, how do I say this? At first, I identified as asexual. And there's a whole thing about asexuality and how is it even considered part of the LGBT community? Of course it is, and it should be. So there was that. And then I identified as bi, which has whole other things of, are you lying? I don't know how to explain it.
People who doubt your identity because that's an identity that's often challenged. Yeah, I get it. It's funny you mentioned that you resonate with the term because it's not specific, because a lot of people that commented shared a similar thing where they said that they appreciate queer as a term because it is so vague, because it is a term that doesn't exactly say that I'm neither this or that. You started to identify as asexual, and did that shift or change?
Yeah, I did identify as asexual until I was around 17, I believe. And then I realized that it was more in the course of bisexual. And because I realized that, let's just say that I've had some problems in the dating vicinity, not because I can't find partners, because it's hard for me to feel like I'm connecting to them in the quote unquote right way. And so most recently, I'm in this place that I don't know if I'm just asexual. So in this kind of limbo, I can't commit to either. So queer is a nice term that I like. But even then, the fact that I haven't committed to one or the other feels like I'm cheating, if that makes sense. Like a big fear of mine, it's like taking up space that I shouldn't be taking, if that makes sense. So the word queer feels very like inclusive, and it's okay. Like you don't fit in the boxes that have been provided within the LGBT, and you can have Q. And I don't want to say, oh, everybody who identifies as queer is figuring it out. For all I know, maybe that's the term that I will keep. But at this moment, it feels right.
It's funny having this conversation about this term because I've been having a lot of thoughts recently about the distance between where I am now and where I used to be. And I had the realization that I've had a lot of friends since I've moved to the city who have come out to me as transgender. People that I've known for a while whose identities I've seen shift. And it's interesting because I always had this feeling in the back of my head about this, and it wasn't really a solid feeling. It was just a feeling that I couldn't quite put my mind to. And what I realized recently is, I think maybe just because I've gotten a bit older, I have forgotten that there was a time in my life where my identity was not as solid as it currently is, and I had to have those uncomfortable conversations with people about my identity shifting. And that for me, I know back when I claimed queer as an identity, even if I was very outwardly rah this or that, it was really a space that was vague enough for me to be where I was currently as I reached for where I wanted to be. It was easy for me to identify as queer, easy in quotations. It was easy for me to cling to that identity when I was younger and I was going through the early stages of my trans life. And I didn't want to necessarily, like you're saying, mislead anyone about how I was phrasing my identity, if that makes any sense. Because I do remember early on when I was younger having a lot of hesitation around aggressively claiming trans woman as a label, which is why I came into my binary identity a little bit slower. So I can understand the appeal for a lot of people for queer as a term that kind of sits at where they currently are as they're exploring. One question that I got from someone that made me think a lot about this particular topic is people are using the term queer, but what they probably should be using is the term questioning. And that, I don't know, seems a bit relevant here. What would you say to someone who would say that the term you're looking for is not queer, but questioning?
That's a very good question. That's the first time I've heard of that. And just based off what comes into mind at this moment is that I have always known, at least this is where I see the difference. I have always known that I am not straight, if that makes sense. I have always known that I have been either ace or like bi or like some form of not the norm. So questioning, at least to me, it feels like I'm backtracking into something that I am not doing. I could see, however, how that could be a very useful term for people who are still questioning if they are straight. Well, that has not been the case for me. I've always known, let's just say that it's been very clear that I am at least romantically attracted to women. I do think that, I don't know, it's very interesting because at least for me, like for example, for right now, like even though I'm having this call, I don't think I've ever disclosed myself as queer. And I think it has something to do with the sense that I feel like there might be a stigma to people who use the word questioning or stuff like that as I'm trying to expose myself to find community within the queer community, if that makes sense. And I use queer as in LGBTQ, if that makes sense.
It's interesting.
Maybe it's all in my head.
No, it totally makes sense. One of the questions I hope I get to at some point today is, I think queer for me meant something really different back when I first claimed it. And part of queer identity for me back in the day was it was so hard to find other people who were LGBTQIA+. And so that kind of made you like a queer punk interesting person, to be a person who was so outside of the norm that it was rare to run into people. And what I've seen it switch into a bit more now is queer is a catch-all term that a lot of people use to find community. I do a lot of promotion of queer events through the organization I run out in Los Angeles, and pretty much everything is labeled queer this, queer that, because there's this idea of whatever we're doing here, it's not straight. Even if it's specifically on this end or that end, or we're leaning into this or we're leaning into that. It's just, this is not a hetero space, and that's what queer has colloquially become. So I do find that to be interesting, and I hope that we get to talk about that a bit more. I'm going to take the next call, but I really appreciate you calling in and giving me your thoughts and sharing your brew of true tea with me.
Of course. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good one.
Who am I speaking to, and what is your true tea?
Hi, Kat. My name's Rami, he, him. I'm a basic cis gay man. So I agreed with your video that it's not that I have a problem with the word queer, and I understand it as a more contemporary political tool. But when I hear the word queer, I don't really identify with it per se. One, I think I'm pretty comfortable with who I am, and to the point, I don't really even think about labeling myself ever. Like, I haven't come out in years at this point. I just live my life. And that's a privilege, living in New York City that has a pretty big gay population. So it doesn't really come up as something I have to defend very often. And I feel pretty comfortable with that. And then usually when I hear people describing their experience as a queer person, it doesn't necessarily seem relatable, in the sense that I don't think about my identity a lot or having to define it, which, like I said, is a privilege. And yeah, and I guess with the history of the word queer, like, I know it used to be considered a slur. I'm 35 now, so probably when I was a lot younger, I knew it to be a slur. And I think probably the first time I heard the word queer was in relation to genderqueer in college. My understanding was it was in between genders, or like outside of the binary sort of thing, and I never really related to that per se. But if somebody were to call me queer or like part of the queer community, I wouldn't fight them on it. I think there's so many more important things to worry about than that. And I'm also not in the business of policing how other people identify or what their experience is. I'm much more of a you do you kind of person, and if it's empowering or liberating, then who am I to say it's not? But I guess it might also just be a remnant of when I was grappling with my identity more. Back in the day, the word queer wasn't like used as frequently or as often. It was a more binary and more like heterosexual versus homosexual versus bisexual. So that's the framework under which I came to terms with myself. And now that I'm like much more comfortable and confident in my skin, I don't feel the need to like retread that area. So it's just more of a oh, okay, I'm hearing this word a lot more, but I don't think about it too much. But yeah, like you mentioned in the video, I understand it as a more contemporary political and like something more people are identifying with now. And I think one hesitation I have is I hate to think of the day when Tucker Carlson and friends start referring to us as like weird.
Yeah, because that would make me cringe. It's like, okay, here we go, because it means something so different to them. I'm glad that. No, go on. What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was like, they already call us the alphabet mafia and all of that.
Which honestly, I think is the coolest phrase, alphabet mafia. Like yeah. I've been wanting to make alphabet mafia merch for quite some time, actually. Yeah. It's so interesting hearing your perspective on this, specifically as a gay man living in New York. There's plenty of gay shit happening there all the time. And so you might not even feel the need to be like, yeah, I'm gay, because who cares in this environment? Right. And I think for me, that's, like I said in the video, that's my feeling about it as well. When I first came out, I promise you every conversation I had at some point in time had to relate back to me being genderqueer. Like, I mentioned it so often. It was in every one of my bios. It was something that I said all the time because I was discovering it. I was figuring it out. It was an exciting thing for me to discuss. So it's something that I felt like talking about all the time. And then as I got older, and it just became a thing that never really came up unless I like wanted it to, it just became less of a thing that I identified with. because it just wasn't a conversation that I was having all the time, which of course made me question, so how much of this was really you identifying with it to begin with? And I mentioned this in passing, but one of the experiences I had that kind of really reiterated this to me was I was hanging out with one of my lesbian friends, and we went to a bar, which for me, the bar is a bar, honestly. But when she was there, she was like, how can you stand this? Because what she was seeing, because it was, I guess we'll call it a straight bar, but in my mind, it's just a bar. But what she was seeing was all of these people are so viciously heterosexual. This is one of these bars where men were being loud. It was a sports bar kind of vibe. And I was just like, hey, everyone's friendly and the drinks are cheap. But she was alienated by the environment, inherently alienated by the environment. And it made me realize that I have not felt that way in a really, really, really long time. And that was so interesting to just understand that there's a different way that certain people that are queer move through the world. I occasionally see blogs about we're traveling as lesbians, we're traveling as gay men, we're traveling even sometimes as trans people, as though there's all of these concerns to be had. And I never think of that. And it just made me feel so incredibly privileged, right? Like it made me realize, oh shit, I never think of this. This is just something that I just don't, it doesn't come into my mind. But then there are people who really do think of this, which is part of why I feel, as I said in the video, stolen valor around the claiming the term, because it's just things I don't think about very often. But of course, one of the reasons why I cling to it politically is, like you said, Tucker Carlson, we're all a bunch of fucking queers. That's the way he looks at it. We're all a bunch of dirty fucking queers. Even if I might not identify, I'm willing to say, yes, we are all queer here in the city, blah, 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 because it's just, that is the position that we are in, where politically it is what it is, and we are for sure fighting against people who don't want us to exist. So I'm totally fine claiming queerness in that context.
Yeah, and not to throw other gay men under the bus, but sometimes we need to be. I'm not invested in any infighting or this is too much or that's not enough. I'm like, we are all either not cis or not straight or whatever, and they don't really care
Yeah,
if we're fighting each other or not. Yeah, I find maybe this is like peripherally related to queer or not, but I find the conversation about rejecting gender norms that are basically remnants of 1950s nuclear family America and other Judeo-Christian type values. I'm like, how can any of us live in the modern world and be that invested in whether something is masculine or feminine?
yeah,
I have to work to pay my bills. I have to cook my own food if I want to eat. Like, I have to have a variety of skills that borrow from all these things that were separated before, but it's like impossible to live in the modern world and be worried about baking is too feminine, I can't do that, or whatever. It's like such bullshit.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to some stuff I said with the other caller, where it's so far away from maybe where you and I may be. Living in LA, I run into people all the time where they're from a small town in West Bumblefuck somewhere, and they come out here and it blows their mind that men are wearing nail polish and color their hair, and that's like crazy to them, because where they're from, gender roles are so solidified
Enforced,
that, and look, as a person who used to live in fucking Orange County, when you're in certain areas, right, like even if it's not overtly stated, you feel it, that pressure to assimilate into a specific idea of a gender. I don't even recognize my OC version, because it was just so not me. It was so based on, here's what everyone around me wants from me, and because I don't want to stick out too much, I'm gonna try really hard to assimilate to that. It takes a while for people to break away, which is part of why, like I said, I feel like it's probably really queer to them, and who am I to say it's not? Who am I to say it's not?
Yeah, totally agree. And I'm from small town in Michigan, so yeah, I feel like my life before and after are like completely different, so it's kind of hard to relate back to that person, but I totally understand it, and I think it helps people along their journey and is totally fine.
Yeah, I'm happy for them as they find themselves. Thank you so much for calling in. I appreciate you for sharing the perspective that you shared, and you've got a great voice. You should do voiceovers.
Oh, thank you. Take care. Have a great night.
Bye. All right, you guys. So that is going to do it for our calls. I really appreciated all of the calls that we had today. A lot of them really made me think, kind of actually filled in some blanks for me, and I hope that they did the same for you guys too. As per usual, you can check the full version of this call-in show on my Patreon account, which is patreon.com/katblaque, black spelled BLAQUE, cat spelled KAT. And I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say about the next topic of True Tea, because it's going to be a really juicy one. You guys should be able to see the next version of True Tea pretty soon on my Patreon as well. So on that note, I will talk to you guys later, and I cannot wait to have the conversation with you again. All right, bye.